Welcome, everyone. We're going to talk about Kenny Omega's conversation with Adi Shankar. Some very interesting quotes being thrown around here. I know that you've all seen the quote that we're here to talk about, and that was the quote about Logan Paul. And we're definitely going to get into that first. Then we may jump around because there's other stupid things said in this interview that I might want to discuss depending on how much I can stand, because I really don't like these people. This Adi Shankar fellow is one of the dork. He is the dork, the number one idiot who ruined the Devil May Cry cartoon for Netflix and has been crapping all over the franchise. I cannot stand this fucking guy. Excuse my language, YouTube. So we're going to get into the Logan Paul bit first, because I definitely want to discuss that. And then we'll just jump around and see what we can get into next.
Because is it fair to say that the barrier to entry to be a wrestler has it's gotten easier?
Absolutely, no. That is absolutely fair to say. It's remarkably easier nowadays.
It's easier, right? Because a guy easier. Like Logan Paul,
yep,
would have been beaten up in 92. They would have beaten him up in the locker room. What are you? You know what I mean? It was like a closed ecosystem.
Absolutely.
Which now it's there's more of an integration. Their activations. They're doing deals with Nike. There's more celebrity crossover.
Oh, I mean, I've said it before. I don't know if I've ever said it publicly or not, but I think we're headed on a path where it's a couple of WrestleManias down the road, the main event's going to be Logan Paul versus Mr. Beast, and it's what is their wrestling acumen? How many miles have they put into it? It's does it matter? It's the process of evolution.
So that is the next.
Let's talk about this. So Kenny Omega is he's worried. He's he's channeling Roddy Piper. This whole thing is an interesting conversation when we talk about Logan Paul, because Logan Paul is an athlete. He was never a professional athlete, but he was an athlete. But we've been down this road with these celebrities before, right? Remember, Andy Kaufman wanted to wrestle. He tried to do it in New York, and Vince McMahon Sr. was like, nah, we don't need no celebrity. So he went and did it in Memphis, and ended up being a hit. Ended up doing major business with Jerry the King Lawler down in Memphis. Kennedy McMahon was no dummy. He goes and he gets Mr. T. And Roddy Piper is offended, and Dr. D. David Schultz is upset. How can you bring in an actor into the locker room? This is what got Dr. D. David Schultz fired, by the way, not slapping John Stossel. And then throughout history, we've been dealing with this, from Dennis Rodman and Karl Malone to Lawrence Taylor to Floyd Mayweather. We've been doing the celebrity stuff 50, 60 years now. From the main event to the middle of the match to Jon Stewart getting involved with Seth Rollins and John Cena at SummerSlam. We've been doing all sorts of celebrities, comedians, and who knows what. And across all the companies, from Snoop Dogg and AEW to Pac-Man Jones and TNA. Good luck, outside of maybe Japan. And they still wrestle blow-up dolls and stuff over there. We've been doing this stuff for years and years. What this screams of is the same stuff where people think that their wrestlers are going to be replaced with CGI. They're going to have AI wrestling eventually. They're going to just have the wrestling without the boys and all this crazy stuff. I'm not too concerned with any of this stuff, because these celebrity gimmicks, they come and they go. The celebrity comes in, they boost business, and then they're gone. Logan Paul has stayed around longer than most. He doesn't work a full-time schedule because this is not what he has chosen to do with his entire life yet. But he's made far more appearances than most celebrities who will get involved in pro wrestling. He's trained, extensively with private trainers. He's pretty good at doing some of the moves. He's a hateable personality. I don't see a problem with Logan Paul at this point. We're in what, year 4 or 5 of Logan Paul doing this? Or maybe it's about 3 or 4 of Logan Paul wrestling pretty regularly. Now, just because he didn't decide when he was a youth to wrestle, is he not allowed to, hey, I got famous doing this one thing, I'm not allowed to wrestle anymore? Does the only people who get to wrestle are the people who are watching wrestling on TV in their underwear as children and decided that's what I want to do with my life, and then all of a sudden they're entitled to being on TV? I don't view wrestling that way. I don't think anybody's entitled to be on TV. I think Logan Paul's good enough. Do I think he's world champion, Hall of Fame level? No, he's only been doing this a couple of years. So everybody who hates him needs to really take that into account. But we've been doing this for a long time now. We've been doing these celebrities. Even in the territories, they did celebrities. Now, when I originally started this clip, I thought it was Kenny Omega that said that Logan Paul would have gotten beat up in the locker room in 1992. But Omega agreed, but he wasn't the one who said it. Adi Sankar was the one who said it. We all know, most of us who know anything about pro wrestling know, that before the year 2000, you'd have been hard-pressed to get a Kenny Omega or the Young Bucks on television during the territory days. If Bill Watts was 6 foot, he was a 6'6", maybe 6'8", he was smacking NCAA football players, smacking pro wrestlers, guys, big jacked up dudes, he was smacking them, putting his hands on them. What would he have done to Kenny Omega? Let alone Logan Paul. You would have been the same in his eyes. If Stu Hart was stretching bodybuilders in the dungeon, what do you think he would have done to Kenny Omega, let alone Logan Paul? You would not have been any different. If Vern Gagne made Ric Flair almost puke and die from working out in that cold-ass barn, what do you think he would have done to Kenny Omega? There's this idea that Kenny Omega could have made it at any point in time. No, he was perfect for his time. He was perfect for his time because the barrier to entry had already fallen through the floor. They're talking about the barrier to entry as if Kenny Omega came through some of the toughest times in wrestling history. It's like, no. There were guys who had it much worse. Kenny Omega quit the WWE developmental and they didn't even put their hands on him. Like, imagine that. Imagine that. There was guys who were getting beat up in every developmental territory before the WWF showed up. And then some of them even got beat up down there. They got yelled at. Like the Luchasaurus. He got yelled at and he wrote a complaint. Oh, what's the barrier to entry here? Yeah, what is the barrier to entry here? You got all sorts of sissies and weirdos in wrestling now. All sorts, and all of the companies, people who wouldn't even make television 20 years ago are now in the ring. It's not about Logan Paul in my book. If Logan Paul couldn't get in, this guy who stood across the ring and literally fought Floyd Mayweather, if he's not allowed to wrestle, then, why should anybody with no serious athletic background be able to wrestle? I mean, I don't get it. I don't understand this. This is kind of goofy to me. But, what more can be said, really? He just don't like Logan Paul, and Kenny Omega is coming from a place of very deep hatred. And I like it. I wish he'd just come out and say it. Just come out and say that you hate him. That's what I want to hear. Just tell me you hate him. You don't like that he gets all this positive attention from being able to do moves. And you can do moves, but people aren't really impressed with your moves anymore because you've been doing this shit for 20 years now. But the only reason people are impressed by Logan Paul is because they're surprised he can do anything. He's not supposed to be doing the stuff that he's doing. It's a dog bites man versus man bites dog. This is a man bites dog story. Some guy that everybody only knows as a YouTuber all of a sudden can throw a decent punch and do a moonsault. What the fuck? That's the story. If he was trained to do moonsaults, nobody would care. If he's been doing moonsaults for 15 years, nobody would give a shit. Floyd Mayweather even wrestled at WrestleMania. There is Joe Louis, former boxing heavyweight champion, was a pro wrestler at one point in time in his life when he was down on his luck after the government robbed him of millions and millions of dollars. Is Logan Paul like any of these people? Well, technically, no. All of these people I mentioned before, with the exception of Andy Kaufman, was professional athletes. Logan Paul is technically not a professional athlete, but he has boxed. He's taken on some serious boxing opponents. These were not serious fights. They were bullshit fights for sure. But he trained for them for real. He got in there and took the punches for real. Whether the person was shooting to kill or not, up for debate. But he put in the work. When it comes to pro wrestling, he put in the work. Why shouldn't he be able to wrestle? If Mr. Beast wanted to put in the work, go for it. Okay? Do I think that they should be the main event? Well, I guess it depends on how you put things together. I do think that the integration of the individuals like ISHO Speed and KSI and all these people, especially in WWE, is getting really bad. And the Travis Scott thing kind of really tipped over the scale for a lot of people. And they're kind of like, no, we don't want to deal with this. We don't want this at all. No more celebrities, no more rappers, no more Twitch guys. We don't need any of that stuff. We don't need any of these people. No more Snoop Dogs in the ring. And there's a degree to which I will say I agree with that. So here we go again. He's going to continue with this. I'm very interested in this conversation that they're having here because Kenny Omega just looks very, very upset, but he won't just say what he's thinking, really.
Allowed the industry to accept that.
Yeah.
And now outsiders are welcomed, right? Case in point, I'm walking around backstage and I'm like, hey guys.
True. But I would also argue that, and this has been heavily publicized as well recently. It's like people are getting cast in roles for films just based on their social media following. And that's what that's kind of in relation to the Logan Paul thing. And I go, he just decided he wanted to be a wrestler or try wrestling, or his agent was like, hey, why don't you give this a shot? They're willing to give you a shot. Mm-hmm. You're in shape. You know what I mean? You have a huge community that we could plug into. Mm-hmm. I would say it's more that, but also as to your point too, it's like that thing that was once so protected, that sort of industry insider kayfabe, where it's like, we don't tell anybody how things are backstage. Right. We don't tell you how things work, how we live, how we operate. Now the doors are almost wide open.
Absolutely, right.
It's a paper thin curtain. Right. You know what I mean?
I agree. And I lament the loss of kayfabe as much as anyone. I really do. I liked the immersion of pro wrestling when you can't really tell the difference between character and the person. But once, people started getting offended by the character and then not liking the person as well, which is much like what happened with my mom, where, she watched The Color Purple and then she saw Danny Glover play Mista in The Color Purple, and she so offended him, she refused to watch any movie that now features Danny Glover. I did not expect that would become a thing in wrestling, but it has. Where now, you could be a wrestler involved with, a pretty hilarious or usually very offensive angle, and it could be obviously a character, and people will hate you personally because of the character that you're playing. It's absurd, but that's the world we live in now. But yeah, I do. I lament kayfabe. I really do. Let's let Kenny Omega finish his point.
Really want to peek behind the curtain, just open it up for yourself. You know what I mean? And that's also an issue, and I think that's why fan bases nowadays are a little more sensitive than they should be, and bad guys can't be bad guys because they feel like they're a part of our real lives and they want to be our real lives. So when they see us portraying these evil people, they actually assume that that evil extension is really who we are on the inside.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And in a way, you could almost say that's a great thing. They believe I'm a terrible person because I'm doing these bad things, but now they believe in it so much they don't even want to support your show, which is a problem.
Yeah. This is why when I think it was Jim Cornette that pitched an idea, I think maybe even Vince Russo might have been on the same tip about pitching a transphobic storyline for what was it, Nyla Rose? That, one of the females or whatever should stand up and say that she doesn't want to wrestle Nyla Rose and that Nyla Rose is a man. Something to that effect. And they were like, oh no, we can't do that. No. That'd have been the first goddamn thing they would have done in 1998. It'd have been the first angle they would have done. As they would have said, oh, this person is transgender. Obviously, that's where we're going with it. Immediately. And nobody would have cared. They would have just said it's fiction. They'd have toned it down eventually. They would have said it's fiction. It's not real. And they would have been right. But what Kenny Omega's talking about is exactly what I just said. The lines, and that's the weird thing. Kayfabe has been destroyed. Now people can't tell the difference. It's gone from kayfabe is so protected that you can't tell the difference, that now things are so wide open you can't tell the difference. Wonderful how horseshoe theory that turned into. Right? That's amazing. Who would have thought that the company can be so open, so playing your face so much that you get kind of paranoid that you're getting worked when they're shooting straight with you, and then when they're trying to work you, you're thinking it's a shoot. You see this stuff all the time with these dirt sheets. They will follow some shit said in character, and then the fans will respond as if it's a real statement. And they do it all the time. They're just doing it now with this Dominic Mysterio CM Punk comment. He made a comment about CM Punk. People are like, oh my God. He's obviously in character. There's people out there who literally still can't tell the difference. And that's partially because they're so used to, if a wrestler is not what a WWE branded something, then he's not in character. But if they stay in character and do media in character, then people will get that line blurred again and they get lost in it. It's very entertaining. I'm not even going to hold you up. It's very much something that I thoroughly enjoy. I want to close with this thought, though, because Kenny Omega is about to say something that I think is very interesting.
Or like me, or love me, or just be indifferent. Sure. It's fine. But the beauty of wrestling is that it can actually be anything. Yes. And I think that's what we try to prove with BTE, is that we can be a murder mystery. We can be a horror. We can be a comedy. We can be a raunchy comedy. We can be a rom-com. We can be dramatic. We can be we can be anything. We could be we can be animated. We even did an animated episode that one time. Yeah. We can be stop motion. And it's really but it can all exist within the same universe. And I think that's what makes wrestling very unique, is that we can get away with it. 100%. Until you can't, you know what I mean? Or until there's an expectation of like, you need to be this and this alone. And I think that's when I started to feel, I don't want to say bored. It's not bored. It's not that. It's just, and I don't want to say shackled either. But it's like when you are, for example, if someone says, hey.
Let's pause it right here real quick before, I don't know. Maybe I won't let him finish that thought, but I'm looking at this thing and I'm saying to myself, bro, I actually kind of agree that wrestling could be anything. We've seen all sorts of storylines in pro wrestling. Some of them dabble in thriller, some of them dabble in murder mystery, rom-com, etc. Usually, it's the AEW fans talking about how WWE just don't want to do wrestling. Just be a wrestling show. That's all you need to do, man. Just wrestle. Just be where the best wrestle, man. And everybody else is saying, like, hey, why can't we do storylines that, push the boundaries or, take things in a different direction sometimes or whatever the case may be. Let's get experimental, especially during the era of Vince where all they did was experiment. And sometimes these things worked. And you got the Attitude Era, or you got really cool stories like the romantic angle between Randy Savage and Elizabeth, which was basically a drama that played out over the course of 2 or 3 years. Sometimes you get the comedic rom-coms, like, Dolph Ziggler, Otis, and Mandy Rose. Sometimes you get the whodunits, like these really bad thrillers that they do. Or, sometimes you get a mystery, like, who injured The Undertaker or whatever the case may be. And they all have varying degrees of success, just like all movies and TV shows or whatever. A wrestling angle is going to have a varying degrees of success. But when you hear somebody say that wrestling can be anything, you have to also understand that while that is true, it can't be everything, because if it's everything, then it's nothing. There has to be boundaries to this thing, okay? And things have to, for instance, my boundary is there should not be a storyline where it cannot end in a fight. That's the bottom line. Whatever you do in terms of storyline, it has to culminate in a wrestling match at some point. Because that's what you're here for. Okay? You can jazz up in any way you want to get to this match, but the ultimate goal is to get the match in the ring. Now, how long the match goes, how the match is booked, we can discuss that later. But for me, that's the boundary of wrestling. And you see Lucha Underground, and there's murders, and there's, undercover cops, and there's actually a cannibal who was eating people. They're still having wrestling matches. They're highly edited wrestling matches, but they're still wrestling matches. If you are going to have a guy and he's going to have a wrestling match and he's surrounded by fire, it's still a wrestling match. It might be a little ludicrous, but it is what it is. Ultimately, I think that's the boundary. Now, some people will say, wrestling doesn't need to have so many promos. Wrestling doesn't need to have celebrities, no celebrity involvement. Wrestling doesn't need to have comedy. It doesn't need to have this or that. Most of that stuff I don't mind, but it's on a case-by-case basis. I'm honestly not upset with comedy, but it has to be at least funny comedy. If I feel like it's try hard or it's too much, I'll just say it's too much. Sometimes, the Vince era went too hard with the comedy. They would try to do a little, they would miss quite often with the comedy. Some of it was good, some of it was bad. It's just kind of how comedy works. Comedy is very hard. It's a skill. Same thing with drama. Some people get into these roles and they get real theatrical, and it's almost like a high school play. And, there's a lot of different things you can do. And Kenny Omega saying this means that he actually kind of gets it. He kind of understands it. He's done it himself to a degree. But it's weird that his fan base doesn't seem to get it. The fan base doesn't seem to think about wrestling matches in any way other than, is the match full of flips or quote unquote technical prowess? The Zack Sabre Jr., how many wrist locks can a wrist lock if a wrist lock could wrist locks? And it's like, that stuff's boring too because the personalities are boring. Wrestling is all about personalities and the people in it. So this goes back to the Logan Paul thing. Is if Logan Paul is an interesting person, nobody would care that he's a celebrity. Nobody would care if he's been wrestling his whole life. Ultimately, people want to see interesting people fight. Whether it's boxing or MMA or pro wrestling. Interesting people fight, or even on baddies. You know, these stupid love and hip hop TV shows or whatever. If they find that these people are interesting and then watching them have confrontations, that's what pro wrestling is about. You know, what the confrontation is over, what the conflict is over, you can figure that part out. But the crux of it is it needs to be interesting people. Wrestling is not full of interesting people right now. A lot of people that are in wrestling right now are boring individuals who've wanted to do this their whole life and they've never done anything else. Which is the worst, because if you read books about people, especially people from 70, 80 years ago, you know, some guy came home from World War II or something like that and needed a job, decided to go, you know, be a leg breaker for the mob or something like that before he fell into pro wrestling. You know, the guy's going to have a different perspective on the business, how money is made, who should be in, all that sort of stuff. Rather than, I grew up watching this on TV, I grew up tape trading, you're going to have a very different perspective. So when you go after somebody like a Logan Paul or your celebrities or whatever, it needs to be taken into account that a lot of these wrestlers today, they grew up with the floor being very low. If you get into a WWE system, you might be able to get a job anywhere because you were on WWE TV, even if you got very little experience. You know, if you have to want it though, you have to actually put in the effort. You know, I'm not saying like people are just going to back up the Brinks truck to your porch. There's a lot of people who get cut from NXT and they basically just stop trying. They just open up a OnlyFans or some parallel system and then they just chill off that. Some people hit the grind and they go out and try. Some people, they get on the plane, they go to Mexico or they go to Japan or whatever. But that's what wrestling is all about. Interesting people getting into confrontations. Stop blaming other people if you're not interesting enough. And I see a lot of fans, they're upset about this. It's like, yeah, if your favorite wrestler isn't interesting to the majority of people, nobody cares what he does. I don't care how good of a fighter he is if I don't want to watch him fight. So what more is there to it? But let me know what you guys think about all this stuff. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.